All right, so today I thought I would do a video about what it's like growing up without a father. So I feel like sometimes there's a stereotype that if someone doesn't have a father, it's usually because like the mother had a child outside of wedlock, or maybe there's like a divorce where the father's left and is out of the picture. That wasn't really my situation. In my situation, my mother was a widow. My dad died when I was very young. I have very faint memories of him before he died, but because with my mother being a widow, that doesn't always fit the stereotype of sometimes people think like single mother, she's gonna have to struggle extra hard. She's gonna have to work like two jobs just to scrape by. That she's always gonna be, financially in dire straits. I guess that wasn't my situation because with, my father's life insurance and will and everything, that my mother was left with some money. My mother never actually worked ever. Like, she never had a job. She was married. My father owned his own business and, obviously was the breadwinner of the family. And so then after he passed away, she was left with money, like life insurance money, like she was taken care of financially. The house was already paid for. And so therefore it wasn't like, I had this so-called struggling single mother, because she never worked. She was always home to take care of me. And so that doesn't really fit the stereotype. But that's also kind of weird because when you have a role model, like you're a female and then your female role model has never had a job before, it has never worked in the real world, that's kind of a strange role model to have. Because if you're supposed to grow up to aspire to be that, I was completely the opposite. I aspired to like grow up and have a career and, travel the world and do all this stuff that wasn't what was modeled for me. That's why it's like sometimes kids don't always grow up to do what their parents do. They kind of like go off and do the complete opposite of what their parents do. So in my situation, it was like, yeah, I really wanted to like go to college. I wanted to have a career. I didn't want to just like sit at home and be a housewife, although that would be nice, but that isn't always an option because that's not always up to me. That's kind of up to like two parties have to make that decision, meaning there has to be someone willing to do all the work and pay all the bills, and then I get to just sit at home. Yeah, that would be nice, but that kind of wasn't like my career goal or my life goal. Going back to what I was saying, that so of course there was no divorce, there was no like parents that are always fighting, there was no like having to go back and forth between different households. There also seems to be like this stereotype that like single women, they're dating all these men, they're bringing home a string of men home to their kids. Like, that definitely was not the situation, because I feel like when my mother lost her husband, I mean, she was obviously very sad and upset, and the last thing she was interested in was finding another man. Like, she, honored her marriage, that, even though till death do us part, she still had feelings for him. So when it comes down to like not having a father figure, so like if you don't have a father in your life, like I didn't even have a grandfather in my life because both the grandfathers on both sides of the family had already passed away by the time I was born. So there was no like male role model in the household. And I feel like sometimes when that happens, you kind of grow up where you try to like make up an idea of what it must be like to have a male role model in the household. Like, you go to visit your friend's house, and so you see how their parents are. And a lot of my friends, their parents were divorced. So it's kind of like going over to other people's homes, like what you're seeing is kind of like, well, is this the typical, experience of what it's like to have a mother and father in the household? Also, you kind of like, well, for me, I kind of relied on like what I was seeing on television. So of course, like you would see TV shows like the Brady Bunch or the Cosby Show. And, those were kind of like an idea of what it's like to have a father in the household. Then the father who like makes the rules, the father's the one that grounds you, the father's the one that like pays your allowance, and you grow up respecting the father. And, I just got that from like television and movies and whatnot. But when it comes to real life, and what I said that I grew up and what I aspired to be, I kind of didn't really think of like what it would be like to have a male in the household or to have someone that's like the traditional father role. That if I was going to grow up and think like, okay, well, do I want to get married when I grow up? That wasn't really something I ever really thought about. And that could be because what was modeled to me was there was no like marriage modeled to me. And sometimes just like the simple idea of like having a so-called man come into the household and making all the rules, and that I'm supposed to obey this man or whatever, those are kind of like the traditional ideals that some people out there have grown up with, and I did not. I kind of just thought, like, why would I want someone like in my house telling me what to do when I'm the one who, makes the money, earns the paycheck, spends the paycheck. I cook the food. I clean the house. I do everything. It gets to the point where you think, well, you don't really like need someone else there doing all that stuff because you're doing it all yourself. Now, like I said, it'd be nice to have that, where it'd be nice to have maybe like a hired maid. So in a sense, it'd be nice to have someone that if I did all the work, I come home and someone else has done all the cooking and the cleaning. But I don't know. Maybe that's just like we're in the 2025. That's just not how things are. This isn't the 1950s. But just I thought I would make a short little video about what it was like growing up without a father. In my situation, it wasn't all struggles, but it wasn't like necessarily like having this like overlord of a role model like taking over the household in the father figure role either. So for anyone out there that can relate or not relate, feel free to leave a comment. Thank you.